Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there, everyone. It's just Morgan Streetman this morning, but we got Pat George with us.
Nice to see you so early on a Monday.
Good to see you, too. It's good to be back in the saddle. I was looking forward to getting back into the saddle with Roxanne today, too, but of course not the same saddle, but back in the saddle. We ride horses right next to each other across the ranch here.
And you weren't here last week.
The Beasley Ranch.
You weren't here last week because you were in court.
I was in court last week, almost in court again this week, but the case settled right before trial, so we were able to get back here and finally get back in the swing of things with the show, because the week prior to that, we were out at the fairgrounds for something you were working on, which was
Tampa Home Show.
Tampa Home Show, the best home show in the state of Florida, right?
It's the biggest, the largest, and the oldest, I think.
It was really cool. A lot of great stuff out there. Yeah, I enjoyed my little bit of time there. And, of course, we had a great show that we did out there. But then the week before that, I was traveling. So it's been a while since we've been here in the studio and kind of getting back in the swing of things.
A whole bunch to talk about.
Oh, there's plenty to talk about, and I've got a whole rundown, too, from the Democrat debates last week.
I was thinking about you during that.
I was
thinking how mad you were at some of the things.
Well, I wouldn't. Mad's probably not the right word. I more watch with, just kind of a twinkle in my eye, thinking about these folks are absolutely insane.
Well, see,
absolutely
that would make
insane.
me mad that's what we have to pick from if we wanted to pick that side.
Yeah. And so, I've got clips from the debates, which were some of the most noteworthy parts of the debates, and I did listen to the debates live. I didn't technically watch them because I was trying to get a little bit of work done also, but I did have it on in the background, and so I was noting these different things that were said as I was listening and thinking, well, I got to go back and clip those out for show listeners because we got to do a special on the debates, and I know that's always a popular topic. And so if you're listening there at home and you want to get on the horn with us, please do feel free to give us a call. It's 888-404-1010. And, we're always available 24/7 on morganstreetmedia.com. And you can also go to YouTube if you prefer to just go directly to YouTube and type in Morgan Street Media, and you'll find our videos. And I think this week we're going to clear 10,000 total views.
I was going to ask you your update. That sounds good.
So I'm excited about that. We're not the world's most popular site yet, although we're getting there, right?
You wait till they come a knocking on your door and the word syndication is brought up in that conversation. It is only a matter of hours.
Well, just 90,000 more views to go until we get one of those silver 100,000 views plaques or whatever they send you, from YouTube. I think, and it may not be, you may have to get more than that. You may have to, I think it's 100,000 subscribers. So we're only, we're a few subscribers short of 100K. But that day might be coming one day, And speaking of days that are coming and are finally here, I don't know if you heard about this, Pat George. You might have missed it in kind of the shuffle of everything that's going on. But did you hear that Tommy Robinson has finally been released from that prison in the UK, Belmarsh Prison?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see the little video of him coming out of prison?
I did not see the video, but I just caught the Twitter on when it happened. So,
well, I tell you what, I never realized Tommy Robinson was such a dandy fellow because he got out of prison. He had a beard and his hair was grown kind of long, and he said the first stop was the hairdressers.
Okay.
And I thought that was just an interesting thing to be thinking about when you first get out of prison. You're going to got to hit the hairdressers.
Mine would have been pizza.
At least say barber or something, right? Do they not use that word in England? The hairdressers?
No.
Just a little funny. But anyway, one of the things I thought was interesting, a couple things I thought were interesting about that Tommy Robinson story, he was put into jail on contempt of court charges. Yeah. They retried him. They convicted him on that contempt of court, which was, if you remember what the contempt that he was displaying towards the court was, he was outside of, I believe it was a Leeds courtroom. I may be off on the exact town, but I think it was Leeds in England. I'm going from memory here. But he was outside of that courthouse, and he was publishing on Facebook Live. He was essentially trying to draw attention to this Muslim grooming gang that was operating and that was being tried in criminal court there. And one of the reasons I thought this was particularly noteworthy and interesting is, just as kind of a study of the lack of press freedom in the United Kingdom. And to me, that's a real serious issue that prevents people from knowing the truth about a number of important matters that affect their lives. And, the UK has these sort of draconian things that can be put in place, these press restrictions that can be put in place by the government, and literally nobody's allowed to talk about anything that they, if it's in one of these topical areas that they've identified as being off limits. So naturally, one of the topical areas that's sort of considered broadly off limits is criticism of Islam. And so one of the ways that they're attacking that is by putting in place these restrictions on anyone talking about court proceedings that have been brought against these grooming gangs. And so you can't talk about them. You can't publicize what's going on. So, I mean, again, he's doing Facebook Live, which some people would say is not journalism just because it doesn't come through one of the traditional channels. Now, I'm not the type that agrees with that sort of highly restricted view of journalism and journalists, and we hear that a lot in context of another gentleman who's being held in prison in the UK, and that's Julian Assange. And we hear in his context the statement that he wasn't a journalist, because he didn't work for a newspaper or something like that. I mean, I hear that argument from what otherwise are pretty smart people that I know. And to me, that's kind of a disappointing argument, because when you go back and you look at kind of the history of journalism and you look at, where was journalism really into its sort of Wild West beginnings, and that would be the beginning of the American Republic, when it was kind of a free-for-all, when you would literally have a printing press maybe in your own home, and you would be printing up these tracts by the thousands to pass out, to hand out, to leave places, leave at the pub or whatever, and hope that people picked up these tracts, read them, and then you either had some political influence, or sometimes these things were even just kind of sold as news, kind of general news tracts with a little bit of politics in it. But that's kind of how what we understand to be modern-day journalism got started. So it was actually individuals, not these formal organizations who had received Pulitzer Prizes and had a large editorial board to make sure that the news content was appropriate for the listeners, or whatever. It was just people printing up whatever the heck fire they wanted to print up in their own basements. And that was journalism.
What do you think came first? An advertisement from a blacksmith or a classified?
Classified, actually.
So?
Oh, I'm almost positive it was a classified, because that's one of the ways. Yeah, they would. They actually, if you've ever been to Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia,
okay,
they've got this living history set up there where they actually have recreated the small Williamsburg community that would have been there, and you've got sort of full-time actors who play different roles in that community. And so you can go and walk around, and like I said, it's a living history exhibit. So if you're familiar with those, it's kind of like a step back in time. You go and you almost feel like you're back in the 1700s. They've got the oxen pulling carts through the streets. None of the streets are paved or anything like that. They're all muddy. You've got the little pioneer band playing in the central square in the sort of on what we call the green, because back then the square wouldn't have been paved. It would have just been a green space kind of in the center of town and things like that. So among all of those people, you can go into the different houses. You can talk to people, and they'll tell you who they are and what they do. And one of the people is actually the guy who's running the printing press, and he sort of can explain the whole process for what a mid-1700s printing press would have been like, how it would have operated, how they would have set the type, because that's what would take them the longest amount of time, would be to set the type for the page. Right. You'd have to sit there. Every little letter had to be put in place just perfectly. And then you'd run off 1,000, say, prints on that. And, of course, in between each print, you got to add some ink to the type so that it prints again properly. And it's this process you get into, and you get going with it, and you can run those 1,000 off once you've got the type set pretty well. But then you got to reset the type maybe for the back side of the page. So now you've got and I don't know how long. I think after you got pretty good at this process, you could set type fairly quickly. But, of course, if you or I were doing it, Pat George, it'd probably take us a whole day to set the type just for one page.
So needless to say, the Gazette was probably 4 pages.
So they kept it short, right?
Yes.
Just front and back, print it again. So anyway, that's the way the press kind of started out. So when we're talking about restricting individuals because they're not formally engaged in journalism as their, money-earning profession, but they're just what we call citizen journalists who say, well, that's not a real journalist and that person's not deserving of protection. I strongly disagree with that. And with respect to the UK, they've now released Tommy Robinson, but they're still holding Julian Assange. And what's interesting, he's been paroled. Remember, he's being held for bail jumping, okay, because he went into the Ecuadorian embassy and sought asylum as opposed to being arrested by the British authorities and then extradited to Sweden to face what appear to be false rape charges. But he's still being held now just because they don't want to let him go because they think he'll run and they know the U.S. wants to extradite him. And I'm not familiar with that as a reason to hold somebody. We'll get back into that when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. When we stopped talking before the break, we were just talking a little bit about the fact that Tommy Robinson's been released from prison in the UK, and somebody that they have not released and they're still holding in that Belmarsh prison is Julian Assange. And, we're not getting much. We don't see much in the media about Julian Assange. He's sort of and I would call him a citizen journalist of a type. I mean, I know there have been a lot of monikers that have been thrown around about what WikiLeaks did. And if you remember, Julian Assange was kind of like the main guy at WikiLeaks. He's certainly not the only guy at WikiLeaks because it's an organization. But he was the leader, the figurehead. For many years, he was, free. He moved about the world freely. And that was until he reported essentially on some murders that occurred during war. We call those war crimes. And there were some murders of some alleged journalists who were murdered by an Apache helicopter crew who decided to just kind of shoot up a small crowd. Now, we don't know all the details of the hows and whys that came to be. I mean, we certainly weren't on the ground at the time. So, all I could say is that in warfare, and Pat George, you're familiar with this somewhat just from being a student of some of this stuff. But in warfare, you're always going to have war crimes. They're just going to happen.
Sure.
Just like friendly fire incidents. You cannot avoid them.
Victims, sure.
I mean, nobody ever intends to go to war and create a bunch of collateral damage, have friendly fire incidents, but they happen in every war. It's the fog of battle. There's some confusion. So now we don't know the basis for why these, what we'd call extrajudicial killings were done in wartime. I mean, perhaps they unintentionally killed these guys for one reason or another, or perhaps they just had a moment of, pure psychopathy and lost their minds and killed them just for fun. I mean, that happens as well, and we've seen evidence of that going on in some of the wars we've been involved in. And, word to the wise, maybe this is one of the reasons that we shouldn't be too quick to get involved in wars unless we absolutely have to. I mean, it's easy to sit back and just say, well, I mean, let's think about it. I mean, we should know the truth, right? We want to know the truth of what's actually going on the ground. So what the problem is that our government doesn't ever want to tell us the truth. So it wants to suppress stories like war crimes, like friendly fire incidents. Pat Tillman, was one who was apparently killed by friendly fire incidents. And, who knows where all that went, because there's even some ideas that, maybe that was intentional in one way or another. But leaving all of those kind of distinctions aside, the point is that the government doesn't really want us, the people, to know about some of the, less attractive parts of war, which is, hey, we're killing each other. Hey, we're killing random civilians who didn't really do anything. They just kind of caught in the crossfire. Hey, here's an instance of us just killing some people for fun, maybe some of whom were even journalists. So the government doesn't want us to know about that. So if you go out and you publicize the fact that happened like Julian Assange did, now you become, public enemy number one, which is exactly what happened to him. And we saw these rape charges that were brought against him in Sweden, which frankly have fizzled away. They seem to be kind of about as serious as the rape charges that were brought against Brett Kavanaugh last year. So you don't think that they can't gin these things up on people. You know what I mean? When they want to take you down, don't think that they can't find some willing person to have a memory of something that happened either a few years ago or, heck, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They'll find somebody who will get up and swear and maybe even be somewhat convincing that that's actually what happened. And, of course, we don't know what actually happened. So maybe he did rape somebody in Sweden. We just don't know. But the point is that he very quickly realized what was going on there was they were trying to get him arrested in Sweden, and then they intended to extradite him to the U.S., where he's under a sealed indictment. So naturally, that's when he went into the Ecuadorian embassy, and he was there for, I think, 6 or 7 years. He was inside of there. And then finally, the British police, as we remember, and this was through agreement with the government of Ecuador, went in and pulled him out of there and kind of carried him out, if you remember the video, carried him out. And since then, we have not heard much from him. And I'll tell you, I watched 60 Minutes last night, and, Anderson Cooper did a lengthy special on this artist. And, he's obviously a very well-regarded artist, somebody who Anderson Cooper has one of his works in his home. And I just thought, wow, what a story. I mean, for an investigative journalism group like 60 Minutes, what a story. And yet nobody's talking anything about Julian Assange, who remains in prison to this day. He's not been charged with anything right now. He's just being held because they think that if they let him go, he'll escape. And they know the U.S. wants to extradite him. I'm being serious. This is exactly why.
There are no link on rules when they have to have a trial or something.
I mean, wouldn't you think so? I mean, that's what I don't understand. I don't understand. How can you just hold somebody without trial? Well, you know what? We're looking at things from the perspective of the American Constitution and our Bill of Rights and the way that our legal system works. And that's not the way the system in the UK works, and that's not the way the system works around most of the rest of the world. I mean, can you imagine being in jail in Saudi Arabia and saying, well, my rights, what about my rights? And they said, what rights? You're in an absolute monarchy. The king can do whatever he wants,
well,
and
what
you
are you
have no
charging
rights.
me for?
Yeah, well, we're charging you just because we don't like the way you look, Pat George. We're keeping you in here. We don't want the people of Saudi Arabia to have to gaze upon you. But, so I'm trying to remind folks to think about the importance of our press freedoms. Think about the importance of our rights under the Bill of Rights, of our rights to know why you're being held, not to be held without charges indefinitely and things like that. And, the fact that we're involved at some level, that we want to extradite Julian Assange here to the U.S. and are possibly saying to the British, hey, just keep holding him until we get our extradition request ready to go or whatever it is. I don't know what the delay is. But the fact that we're involved, I think, is a little bit shameful. I mean, I think we ought to just accept what Julian Assange has done. I mean, he's revealed the truth to people. Obviously, our government didn't want it known, but now it's known. I think overall, the populace is healthier for knowing the truth than they are for believing a lie. So I think overall the population, it's better if we know the truth. It's better if we know the truth about war, because maybe then we won't be so supportive of rushing off and getting involved in all these wars all around the world. And, and I think we saw quite a bit of that if you think back to the mid-2000s with what happened with the Iraq War and the Code Pink protesters and everything else. And I have to say, I'm amazed at how that has merged and morphed into the modern-day Democrat Party and the modern-day progressive left, as they might call themselves, because they are as pro-war as the neoconservatives were just 15 years ago. And so it's amazing just to see the change in the way that people look at war and talk about war as a tool of diplomacy and as a tool to get what we want in the world. So a lot of interesting things there. Well, let's keep moving here because, some other interesting news has come out, and that's with respect to Andrew McCabe. And boy, we would sure like to see some of these folks that were involved in what's now being called, even by our representatives. I think I saw Kevin McCarthy on Sunday Morning Futures yesterday talk about what happened with the setup of President Trump, the claim that he was some kind of a Russian agent, and the entire Mueller investigation and all of the associated shenanigans. He called that a soft coup. A soft coup. Now, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, it sounds almost like something we might say here on the Morgan Streetman Show, because we like to be a little bit sensationalistic to keep your attention. But the point is, what happened with this group, this small group of highly political actors within our Justice Department and the FBI, is they were engaged in an attempt to take down a political opponent through law enforcement means. And Andrew McCabe was right in the thick of that. And if you remember, he leaked a bunch of stories to the Wall Street Journal. Now, that was, I think, about the Hillary Clinton emails, but he certainly leaked, we know, many, many other stories, as they all did. Comey acknowledges leaking stories just to try to get the special counsel appointed. So these guys were just These are the leadership. I mean, you talk about leading by example. I mean, the top of the organization is making politically oriented leaks all the time. All the time. They can't get off the phone with reporters. I mean, they're texting with each other, as we saw Peter Strzok and Lisa Page texting back and forth with each other while they're on the phone with Devlin Barrett, the Wall Street Journal reporter.
When this all started, it didn't happen overnight. When do you think they started planning this soft coup?
Well, we saw the planning of it back in, about July and August of 2016. And that's when we saw in the text messages between Strzok and Page, we saw some of the planning. And if you remember, that's around the time, I think it was early August, that they had the meeting in Andy's office, quote unquote, in Andy's office. And that's Andrew McCabe. And that's where they talked about the insurance policy, whatever the insurance policy was. Now, we believe the insurance policy was this Russia investigation that they brought about. But the point of mentioning this, the reason I wanted to get to it, is apparently all of McCabe's appeals to the DOJ that he should not be prosecuted have been ruled upon and decided that no, they are not accepted. His appeals do not carry the day, so he is subject to prosecution. And I'm not saying he'll get convicted, because we just saw that Greg Craig guy, the Obama White House counsel, get not convicted on the same charge they got Manafort on, okay? And it sounded like they had done the same thing, but he was found to be not guilty. So maybe the same thing will happen to McCabe. But you know who McCabe's lawyer is for this whole thing, Pat George? Michael Bromwich. Now, you may not recognize that name, but he's the guy sitting right next to Christine Blasey Ford during the entire Kavanaugh hearings. He was Christine Blasey Ford's lawyer. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We were just finishing up talking about the fact that it looks like Andrew McCabe is about to get indicted, and we certainly hope that will be the case, because there's no question that he lacked candor when responding to FBI investigators, including Director Comey, who asked him about those leaks to the Wall Street Journal, those strategic leaks that he made, and he said, I don't know how that happened. I don't know what you're talking about. And then later he remembered that he actually did know exactly what they were talking about and changed his story. And, of course, he doesn't think he should be prosecuted for that because he's such a good guy, right? Remember, he's been on 60 Minutes a couple times. He's such a good guy. Gosh darn it. He kept our nation safe. Leave him alone. Well, what about General Flynn? You know what I mean? He was a good guy, too. He also kept our nation safe. They didn't leave him alone, right? So, but now it's a different rules. It's the Department not of Justice. It's the Department of Just Us. Just us. We're the ones that get to do whatever the heck we want to do. You, we're going to prosecute you. But just us, we're going to do whatever we want, and we're not going to hold ourselves accountable. And I'm certainly hoping something changes. I've got faith in Bill Barr, although I don't know what's taken so darn long. And, of course, he just passed on prosecuting Comey for the leak. Now, maybe more is coming down the pike, and that's certainly what we hope for. Wanted to hit this one last point. I mean, we should be getting from the Department of Justice the IG report on the FISA abuses. And if you remember, this is where they submitted, as Comey said, salacious and unverified information to the Foreign Intelligence Services Court. And they did it to get a FISA warrant so that they could listen into Carter Page's phone calls. Okay, and this application that they put in at the top of it says verified. So they put salacious and unverified information into a verified application and didn't put a note anywhere that said, hey, by the way, this part of the application, this is unverified. This is not known to be true for certain. So that's all coming down the pike. So we don't know what's exactly in the IG report. I understand it's going to be pretty bad for what they did. In other words, the IG report is literally going to point out all of the things that they did wrong. Now, hopefully, it doesn't then give the final conclusion that they didn't do anything wrong after 500 pages of pointing out things wrong, because we've seen that from the IG before. So hopefully the conclusion matches the actual text of the report this time, and maybe then we finally get somebody held accountable for abusing our system, running roughshod over our constitutional rights, the Fourth Amendment, the law of the land, the highest law of our land. They ran roughshod over it, and now they're concerned about, well, we got to find a criminal statute to put it under. I mean, this is such a broad abuse of power. I don't even know that they wrote a criminal statute for exactly this, although they probably have, given how many there are. Okay, let's switch gears and let's jump into the debates, because I know we're going to run out of time. We're going to have to steal a little time from the last segment to keep these debates going, because there was so much fun at the Dem debates last week. I mean, I'm sorry if you missed it. Now, I can't totally blame you, because I have got it sort of encapsulated down to maybe about 15 minutes of highlights here, so that's the important part. But, a couple of folks were missing from the debates, and that was Marianne Williamson. You remember the magician, what would you call her, the wizard, Marianne Williamson. Also, Tulsi Gabbard, one of our favorites here on the show, the only candidate up there who's reliably anti-war, Tulsi Gabbard. They don't want her, of course, up on that stage. They don't want her message getting out to anybody, just like they don't want Julian Assange's message getting out to anybody, because if there's one thing that's for sure, we got to keep the wars going. We make a lot of money from war now. Don't get all crazy and start questioning the entire mindset of going to war with every country around the world. Don't question that, or we're going to move you off the stage. And that's kind of what happened to Tulsi Gabbard. Both Marianne Williamson and Tulsi Gabbard are polling about as well or better than some of the folks at the bottom end of the Dem debates. And speaking of the bottom end, I tell you what, Kamala Harris just about served up the worst debate performance that I've ever seen. And even her donors are even starting to say, hey, it may be time to pull the plug on this whole shenanigans.
Yeah, she did drop after that debate.
Oh, she did terrible.
Yeah.
And I've got some clips in here that I think are going to show you what I mean by that. So let's start out with her trying to do her best impression of Marianne Williamson. This was at the beginning of the debate. Kamala Harris.
Thank you. It's great to be back at TSU. So I plan on spending tonight talking with you about my plans to address the problems that keep you up at night. But first, I have a few words for Donald Trump, who we all know is watching. So, President Trump, you've spent the last 2.5 years full-time trying to sow hate and division among us, and that is why we've gotten nothing done. You have used hate, intimidation, fear, and over 12,000 lies as a way to distract from your failed policies and your broken promises. The only reason you've not been indicted is because there was a memo in the Department of Justice that says a sitting president cannot be charged with a crime. But here's what you don't get. What you don't get is that the American people are so much better than this. And we know that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us, regardless of our race, where we live, or the party with which we're registered to vote. And I plan on focusing on our common issues, our common hopes and desires, and in that way unifying our country, winning this election, and turning the page for America. And now, President Trump, you can go back to watching Fox News.
I mean, 1.5 minutes, and she said nothing. I mean, could you be any less compelling? You're going to tell us about your plan for tonight is to tell us about your plans, but then let's just talk generally about, what unites us is so much more than what divides us. But don't listen to any of the specifics that they say later, because if you listen to the specifics, it'll become apparent to you that what divides us is what's most important to the Democrats. So, here that was the beginning for Kamala Harris, and it just gets worse from there. But I want to listen now in on somebody, and this is going to be the only clip we're going to hear from him, and that's Andrew Yang, because he comes at things from a totally different perspective. Andrew Yang is the free money candidate.
Buy the votes.
Now, the insanity of this is really beyond me. The idea that if we just give everybody more money, then they'll be able to afford more things. Like the price isn't going to go up when we give everybody more money. If everybody has more money, naturally, producers and people that are retailers are going to raise their prices a little bit because all of a sudden everybody's got more money. So let's up the prices a little bit. But here's Yang's idea on free money.
In America today, everything revolves around the almighty dollar. Our schools, our hospitals, our media, even our government. It's why we don't trust our institutions anymore. We have to get our country working for us again instead of the other way around. We have to see ourselves as the owners and shareholders of this democracy rather than inputs into a giant machine. When you donate money to a presidential campaign, what happens? The politician spends the money on TV ads and consultants, and you hope it works out. It's time to trust ourselves more than our politicians. That's why I'm going to do something unprecedented tonight. My campaign will now give a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for an entire year to 10 American families, someone watching this at home right now. If you believe that you can solve your own problems better than any politician, go to yang2020.com and tell us how $1,000 a month will help you do just that. This is how we will get our country working for us again, the American people.
I mean, what insanity? Would you donate to Andrew Yang's campaign? I mean, he's going to turn around and give your money away to somebody else.
Well, I might get it right back.
Well, you're going to put in for that, aren't you, Pat George? You're going to put in for your freedom dividend.
10 people are going to
10 people out of how many donated, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So you got better odds of winning the lottery. You do better to take your money down and buy a lottery ticket. But that's Andrew Yang for you. And I'll tell you what, he's actually got a little bit of momentum in the primaries, I think because he's coming at it from such a different angle, which is the free money angle. The free money. I'll give you free money. Well, then the debate turned quickly to health care, and I thought it was interesting how they all talked about what a debt we owed to Barack Obama for health care. Meanwhile, they're telling us how broken the deadgum health care system is. In fact, they've got to do such a radical change to fix it. So to me, it sounds like they're kind of doing both things. They're both praising the existing healthcare system as this amazing feature of our country. It's one of the best things Barack Obama ever gave us. Oh, by the way, it's so horribly broken, nobody can get the health care they need. I mean, do those two statements go together? Let's hear Elizabeth Warren.
So let's be clear about health care, and let's actually start where Vice President did. We all owe a huge debt to President Obama, who fundamentally transformed healthcare in America.
Okay, fundamentally transformed healthcare, and now all of a sudden, just a few short years later, we got to fix it again?
Morgan, I was so mad when I heard this part, and then when they tried to explain how they were going to give us the health care, it sounded like alphabet soup or Charlie Brown's mom. I was yelling at I had to turn it off.
Well, how about the biggest gaffe, in my opinion, as a student of politics, and I'm probably over-intellectual. I'm probably too intellectual for what most of the media turns out. But the biggest gaffe of the night, I thought, came from Joe Biden right at this point when he was talking about health care. See if you recognize the line. I mean, I cannot believe he reused the line. Listen.
My health care plan does significantly cut the cost of it. The largest out-of-pocket payment you'll pay is $1,000. You'll be able to get into anyone who can't afford it gets automatically enrolled in the Medicare type option we have, et cetera. But guess what?
Listen.
Of the 160 million people who like their health care now, they can keep it. If they don't like it, they can leave. Number one.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. If we like it, we can keep it. Well, what was I thinking? Hey, did that sound familiar to anybody else? That sounds familiar.
If you like your private health insurance plan, you can keep it. Oh. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan.
Oh, okay.
Period. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan.
Oh, period, right? That's it. If you like it, you can keep it. So Biden is retreading what is now broadly acknowledged to be the lie that got Obamacare passed. I mean, we had that MIT professor, Jonathan Gruber, talking about the stupidity of the American voter to believe that lie. And now Joe Biden thinks you are so stupid, you won't even hear that he's reusing the same darn lie from last time. I mean, it makes me upset. Now, speaking of stupid, Julian Castro, really got into Biden shortly after that about some of this and attacked his memory. And this was one of the most interesting parts of the debate. Boy, he really went for the jugular, but he came across as sounding just a little bit like a schoolyard bully. Listen
we
here.
owe a debt of gratitude to President Barack Obama. Of course, I also work for President Obama, Vice President Biden, and I know that the problem with your plan is that it leaves 10 million people uncovered. Now, on the last debate stage in Detroit, you said that wasn't true. When Senator Harris brought that up, there was a fact check of that, and they said that was true. I grew up with a grandmother who had type 2 diabetes, and I watched her condition get worse and worse. But that whole time, she had Medicare. I want every single American family to have a strong Medicare plan available. If they choose to hold on to strong, solid private health insurance, I believe they should be able to do that. But the difference between what I support and what you support, Vice President Biden, is that you require them to opt in. And I would not require them to opt in. They would automatically be enrolled. They wouldn't have to buy in. That's a big difference because Barack Obama's vision was not to leave 10 million people uncovered. He wanted every single person in this country covered. My plan would do that. Your plan would not.
They do not have to buy in. They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. And, before the last break, we kind of ran out of time on that clip, so we didn't get to kind of the very end of the clip, which was really the funnier part, which is where Julian Castro starts asking Biden if he just forgot what he said 2 minutes ago. So if you haven't seen that, that's one of the highlights that did make the mainstream media. If you hadn't seen that, it's worth going out there and watching. And I have to say, if you listened hard to Biden's answer immediately preceding that we played, he actually did address the issue. And so I think Julian Castro was a little bit off base about what Biden had said. But that, so that would, maybe if you're in a debate, maybe you don't go for the jugular when you think you've heard something because you might be wrong about it. But anyway, that was one of the points. And I'm telling you, we're going to have to leave a bunch of clips on the table today, unfortunately. But a couple that I really want to get to, you need to hear these. And these came from Beto O'Rourke. Robert Francis O'Rourke, who changes his name to Beto for reasons undisclosed, possibly to appear as though he were Mexican, they say. But in any event, he gives us an interesting history lesson. And Pat George, if you aren't aware, you are a racist, sir.
I called this out in no uncertain terms on August 3rd and every day since then. And I was talking about it long before then as well. Racism in America is endemic. It is foundational. We can mark the creation of this country not at the 4th of July, 1776, but August 20th, 1619, when the first kidnapped African was brought to this country against his will and in bondage and as a slave, built the greatness and the success and the wealth that neither he nor his descendants would ever be able to fully participate in and enjoy. We have to be able to answer this challenge, and it is found in our education system, where in Texas, a 5-year-old child in kindergarten is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled based on the color of their skin. In our healthcare system, where there's a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color, or the fact that there's 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. Whoa. I'm going to follow Sheila Jackson Lee's lead and sign into law a reparations bill that will allow us to address this at its foundations. But we will also call out the fact that we have a white supremacist in the White House, and he poses a mortal threat to people of color all across this country.
A mortal
Secretary
threat.
Castro, 45 seconds.
A mortal threat, okay? The reason women are dying in childbirth, that's racism. The reason children are being punished in school, that's just racism. The reason white neighborhoods have more money, that's all racism. Remember, it's endemic to our country. That's what Beto O'Rourke says. Now, his line of the night, I don't know, you probably heard this one, Pat George.
Oh, yes.
His line of the night. Yeah, if you got any doubt about where the Democrats are actually coming from on guns, let's put that to rest now.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Now, people in the audience are literally standing up and jumping up and down, shaking their hands, shouting. Okay, so heck yes, they're going to take our guns. They're not going to allow them to be used against any Americans anymore. That's exactly what the Democrats think. They're coming for the guns. All right, well, we're going to have to truncate the rest of that debate segment, and I did have some other great stuff, including a couple of more Kamala Harris quotes to share with you, but we're not going to be able to get to those. Another one we're not going to be able to get to today that I had for you is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Far be her from the news, but she's back in the news again, saying that in a few years Miami won't exist because of climate change. So Miami folks, if you're listening, you've got that to look forward to. In just a few short years, you won't be around anymore. And if you should happen to be around, well, then they'll just move the deadline to a few short years beyond that. But before we run out of time here, we got to get into our Out There segment this week. And boy, this is one that I've got. This will get you primed up for the upcoming Halloween month, where we'll do our traditional series of Out Theres on some strange creatures that might exist or most likely only exist in your imagination. But, we've long since passed by the days of witches, warlocks, vampires, and werewolf. And Pat George, you remember those days from years ago. So we're past those days. But this is a story that I wanted to share with you. And I watched just a real snippet of a game a couple of weeks ago involving Tom Brady and the Patriots, and boy, does he look calm in the pocket. I mean, the man, obviously, he's done it so many times that he's got a very calm nature about himself, and they just dismantled the Dolphins yesterday, apparently, and I'm sure he displayed that similar level of calmness. But let's hear what Tom Brady actually attributes his success to, and I think you're going to find it interesting because he attributes it to his wife, who he says is a witch. He says she's a witch, just a good witch. Now listen carefully.
You know, I've learned a lot from my wife over the years. And she's so about the power of intention, you know, and believing things that are really going to happen. And she always makes a little altar for me at the game because she just wills it so much.
Makes an altar.
And so she put together a little altar for me that I could bring with pictures of my kids. And I have these little special stones and healing stones and protection stones, and she has me wear a necklace and take these drops she makes. And I say all these mantras. And I stopped questioning her a long time ago. I did. I just shut up and listened. And at first I was like, this is kind of crazy. And then about 4 years ago, we were playing the Seahawks, and she said, you better listen to me. This is your year, but this is all the things you're going to have to do to win. And I did all those things, and my God, it worked. It was pretty good. And then in 2015, it was about early January, and she said, you know how much I love you? And I said, yeah. And she said, I just want to let you know this is not going to be your year. And of course, we lost. I said, what does 16 look like? And she said, 16 is going to be your year. So it was early January this year, and I said, babe, asking, do we have a chance? And she said, yeah, but you're going to have to do a lot of work, and you're really going to have to listen to me. So, man, I listened to her. And right after the game, she said, see, I did a lot of work. You do your work, I do mine. She said, you're lucky you married a witch. I'm just a good witch.
You hear that? You're lucky you married a witch. Just a good witch.
I thought witches were ugly.
No, apparently not. Apparently witches are the hottest women you can marry, I guess. But you know what? They come with additional problems, potentially. And, of course, we won't have time to talk about all those. But this clip you just heard, one of the reasons I wanted to play the clip, because we have mentioned this on the show before, but the clip you just heard was from February of this year. So February 2019, right? And so this is very recent that he's revealing this, that his success through the years is due to his wife, at least as far as he calls it, setting up an altar before games at which there are magic stones that he uses, along with magical tinctures or little drops that he puts in his mouth. Okay, we're talking about magic potions now. And then he says mantras, as he calls them, or some people would call those spells. So he has a little altar with magic stones on it. He takes magic potions and he chants spells before the game, and that is what Tom Brady attributes his success to. I mean, think about that. Think about that. Not his athletic prowess, not his preparation, not practice, not time on the tapes, but magical spells performed largely by his wife. That's amazing to me. We'll be back next week, folks. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.